Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is squeeze. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you'll hear squeeze used is to mean to press something with one's fingers or hands. So we might be thinking of this action, right, of pressing with our fingers or hands. A second and related way that you'll hear squeeze used is to produce or to force liquid from something by pressing or maybe by twisting it. So with this definition, I very much think of lemons and limes and oranges and how people press them in order to have their juice come out, to force the juice from the fruit. A third way you might hear squeeze used is to mean to manage to get into or through a narrow or small space. Um, this particular definition came up in a reading I was doing with some students in the last week or so. We were talking about a large family living in a small place. And so they managed to get inside or to fit inside this small home for a period of years. A fourth way you might hear squeeze used is to mean to obtain something from someone with difficulty. So sometimes you're going to hear things like squeezing information from a particular person. It means someone is getting or obtaining information. A fifth way you might hear squeeze used is to mean to have a damaging financial effect on someone or something. So you might have heard people saying they were squeezed during the pandemic, particularly people who lost their jobs or maybe had other large medical bills as a result of that. So that would be the damaging effect. You should know that the verb squeeze is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E on the end because we have a vowel consonant E pattern, and then we're going to add ing to form squeezing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding the letter D since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, squeeze, ends in a voice sound. It's a Z sound, if you will. So when we add the past tense ending to this verb, we're going to make a D sound. So it should sound like this: squeezed, squeezed. Okay. Now, there are a number of phrasal verbs connected to this verb, so we're going to focus our discussion on these phrasal verbs today. The first one we'll discuss is to squeeze by. Many times we use this to mean that someone is managing to narrowly or barely pass by something. Maybe they're barely winning or barely surviving something. An example of this might be the team squeezed by their opponents in the last game. So I tried not to be too specific with these examples, but you can imagine one team just barely beating another before a particular game or during the course of a game. Another phrasal verb you might hear is to squeeze in. Many times people are using this to describe how they have been able to find time for someone or something. An example of this might be, can the doctor squeeze me in this afternoon? So what I'm asking with this question, this is a question about ability here. I'm asking, is the doctor able to find a time where I could see them in this particular time period? The next phrasal verb we'll discuss is to squeeze into. This can have a number of different meanings. One would be to force entry or force someone into a very narrow or cramped space or maybe a tight-fitting object of some kind. An example of this might be, four people can squeeze into the back seat of that car. Right? So it means, right, with some effort, right, and maybe sitting very, very tightly, four of us can fit Okay, this is another sentence talking about ability. A second way to use squeeze into is also connected to time. So being having to do something is the better way to say it. Having to do something in a rather short amount of time. An example of this. He squeezes a workout into his lunch break every day. So he manages maybe to go for a run, go for a swim, a bike ride, something like that, each day during this short period of time, his lunch hour. He squeezes a workout into is an example of the simple present, right? So I'm talking about a habit or a routine here. Another phrasal verb you might hear is to squeeze off. Okay? I never like talking about these things, but I feel like it's part of American culture, unfortunately. But squeeze off is frequently used to describe someone who is shooting from a gun. Okay, an example of, unfortunately, again, how I've heard this used recently. He squeezed off a few shots before he was tackled. So again, this sentence here is describing a gunman in this case who is able to shoot a gun before the person is stopped from continuing that action. He squeezed off a few shots, and the team squeezed by their opponents. That first example, those are both simple past tense sentences in the affirmative. Okay, so we're talking about completed actions there. Let's keep talking about some more phrasal verbs. Another one you might hear is to squeeze out. This can also have a few different meanings. One would be to push or force liquid from something. An example of this might be, have you squeezed out enough lemon juice to make lemonade? Okay. So here, maybe we've had a couple lemons that we've been trying to press or force the liquid from in order to create lemonade. This yes or no question is in the present perfect, right? So I'm kind of asking if this action has been completed yet at the moment that I am speaking. A second way you'll hear squeeze out used is to mean to force or push someone out of a place or out of a particular role. An example of this might be, the last CEO was squeezed out after just 6 months. Was squeezed out is an example of the passive voice in the past tense. So here we don't know who or um, whom, I should say, is responsible for this action, who is responsible for this particular action of forcing the CEO out of their role. But someone created an environment where this person is no longer working for the company. The next phrasal verb we'll discuss is to squeeze out of. This ties back to I think it was the fifth definition we talked about earlier. So, obtaining information from someone. Generally, when this is used, it means someone applied some force in order to get that information out. An example of this might be, did the police squeeze a confession out of the suspect? So, I'm sure many of us have seen movies and TV shows where someone is being interrogated, they're being questioned. There might be yelling, there might be some physical threats in some nature, and so those would be examples of force. Many cases not legal, but some force that makes for good drama, good television or movies here to get some information. Another phrasal verb you might hear is to squeeze through. Again, this means to manage to narrowly pass or manage to just barely win or survive. So, pretty similar to squeeze by that we talked about earlier. Here's another example sentence. The team squeezed through the semifinals with a 2-1 win. Okay, so again, just barely winning. The last phrasal verb we'll discuss today is to squeeze up. This generally means that we are pressing two or more things or two or more people very compactly together. An example of this one: the artist squeezed up different colors of clay to begin creating a new vase. Right? So we can kind of imagine someone firmly, compactly pressing together different types or colors, in this case, of clay. Now, let's spend a moment talking about some words and a phrase related to our verb squeeze. And the first word we're going to talk about is just the noun form of this word. So you're going to notice I have the exact same spelling and I have the exact same pronunciation. The noun squeeze can have a number of different meanings, just like our verb. One way you'll hear it used is to refer to the act of pressing something with one's fingers. An example of this might be, he squeezed my hand before giving the speech. Right? So sometimes people might do that when they feel a bit nervous, or in some cultures, and I would say in my family, it was maybe a sign of love to say goodbye or good luck to someone before something, just to press one's hand kind of firmly. Okay, not too hard, not to the point where it creates pain, of course. A second way you hear squeeze used as a noun is just another way to refer to a hug. So you might hear someone say something like, give your grandma a squeeze, right? So they're just saying, give them a hug. A third way we use the noun squeeze is to refer to the state of forcing oneself or being forced into some small or restricted space. An example of this might be, this home will be a tight squeeze for the family. So maybe we're talking about a really large family, 8 to 10 people, and maybe it's a 2 or 3 bedroom house, right? So not a lot of space for everyone who plans to come and live in it. A fourth way you'll hear the noun squeeze used is to refer to a small amount of liquid. And generally, that liquid is coming from a fruit or something else that has been pressed. An example of this: put a squeeze of lime into the drink, right? So, this is going to be a small amount of liquid, right? Just one quick press and a squeeze. Another related word you might hear is the adjective squeezable. And I hope you're noticing that suffix able, able, and that always kind of relates back to our definition here. So able to be squeezed, or easily squeezed, or easily compressed. An example of this might be, do you sell this in a squeezable bottle? Right? This has, I think, been maybe a more common trend with a lot of condiments. So I can remember being really young and a lot of things coming in jars, and then all of a sudden, many things changing over to plastic containers that could be pressed and have whatever condiment, ketchup, mustard, jelly, jam, all of those things kind of press out from it. Last related thing we're going to talk about today is the phrase to put a squeeze on. Generally, when someone uses this phrase, they're talking about coercing or pressuring someone to do something. And many times, this phrase is going to be used to describe a situation where there's strong financial pressure. Very, very common to hear it used in that way. So, I have 2 example sentences to help illustrate these meanings. The first would be, the pandemic put a squeeze on many hospitality businesses. Right? So, you might be thinking of hotels and cruise ships and other related businesses that just couldn't operate in March and April and May of 2020. Okay? So they were under great financial pressure. Okay? And a second example here, rising interest rates are putting the squeeze on employers' hiring. So, here in the United States, our interest rates have increased. So, there's greater expense as companies borrow money. So, many companies are kind of thinking, oh, do we want to hire more workers? Because we've got to pay those people. So, it's putting pressure on many organizations to not hire replacements or to reduce the amount of hiring that they're doing. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.